Welcome to Module 3. This week we're going to be talking about the social pillar of sustainability, and we're going to be looking at diversity and social justice. So when we start thinking about it, this has a lot to do with, as your text starts talking about, the choices we make and how that affects everybody. We did a little bit about the intro, how everything was interconnected last week, but now we're actually going to see about the level of fairness that's going on out there. Now, when we look at sustainable systems, the idea is to have them be better for everyone. How, unfortunately, sometimes it only helps one or two. So we're looking at the idea of equity. Do all people have the same health, the same healthy environment? Do they have the same access to resources? And unfortunately, we find that doesn't necessarily happen. And a lot of this has to do with our beliefs and how we look at consuming things. When we look at ideology to start with, ideology is our set of beliefs, our values, our attitudes about everything around the world and social justice. But whether we like it or not, everybody has a little bit of bias. Everybody has some sort of opinion, some sort of judgment that focuses often on them being the best. And I think it's great if you think your culture is the best. I think you should. But it's when you start judging others based on what you do that we have issues. And that's where we get into prejudice and discrimination, and that's where we get marginalized communities. So the thing I want you to take time to look at this week is, as your readings suggest, perspective taking. Take time to try to think about how other people are feeling, how other people are being affected by the same sort of thing. And this has a lot to do with empathy. Do you have the ability to see something from other people's points of view? Now, we do have a group called the Brundtland Commission, which tried to come forward and find sustainability goals that fit everybody. Unfortunately, those views just took one perspective as well, but they still were trying to say, let's make sure everybody has what they need in order to survive. Clean water, I think we can all agree with. Clean air, we can all agree with. What can we do in order to make that a reality for everyone? And how do we look at those UN development goals and make sure that we are actually conserving everything, that we are actually making sure that what we're doing today is not ruining the future? Now, one thing that always comes up is the Exxon Valdez supertanker, and that is an example where millions of gallons spilled into the ocean, and there were lawsuits and lawsuits. But what we actually find is, so far, Exxon has spent $5 billion in order to try to fight paying the fishers $500 million. So we really start thinking about it. In this particular case, we have this company which has ruined everything, but it's not going back to helping the people who are actually affected by it. We need to figure out what to do in order to make sure that these things aren't happening, and they're happening every day all over the world. We need to start looking at all communities, and especially the marginalized communities. Unfortunately, right now, low-income neighborhoods are usually located near the really bad spots, the hazardous waste sites, the pollution, the different businesses that are still spewing pollution into the air. We see areas of the world that have really, really poor water, and it's always going down to the poorest people. How can we start figuring out how to help those marginalized communities get the resources that they need in order to survive? And how do we make sure that they're getting what they need to stay healthy, to stay in good shape? When we look at it, one thing your textbook doesn't mention enough, if you ask me, is this idea of food deserts, that in many poor areas there is not access to healthy food. And then we look at the people in those communities and we blame them for having unhealthy lifestyles when they don't have access to the healthy food that we see in other areas. How do we make sure that we get that level of equality? And how do we look at things from other people's perspective? So this week, I strongly recommend you take a look at some of these videos and readings. They're really going to help you understand how all of these things are linked. The link between climate change and health and poverty, I think, is a fabulous video. I watched it many times, showing how all of these things are connected. When we want to look at it, when people talk about health, is there really health equity, or are some people not getting what they need? And I want you to start looking at that when we just go into our discussion. See if you can find someone else's perspective to understand that. We also have the beginning of the big project. 3.2 starts this week, but that is kind of complex, and I'm going to create a whole video that just talks about that. But until then, start looking at someone else's perspective and start figuring out ways that we can have better equity.